Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Trump is still sending America down the path of Brexit, as the final credit ratings agency Moody has downgraded America from the AAA rating. There was a time when the UK had the top AAA rating until Brexit saw it fall. A sign that investors may not regard the economy strong enough in future to pay its bills. Now, the humiliation would be, I suppose, worse for America, the world's largest economy by far, and the issuer of the reserve currency. But it should be a wake-up call to voters in America and Britain and other countries as well. But will it be, though? But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So Moody's, the last credit ratings agency to downgrade America's top rating from AAA to AA1, one step below the top rating. There are now no major credit ratings agencies giving the USA the top one. The reasons cited were, for example, rising government debt and widening budget deficits. And that is a problem which, to be fair, precedes Trump as well. But Trump is making it a whole lot worse. I imagine the fact that the US government is seeking to deal with the twin challenges of rising debt and widening deficits by cutting taxes has not helped. Let's begin by explaining why these proposed tax cuts make the situation worse. So government debt is managed, of course, by the sale of bonds. When the government wants to borrow, it sells bonds. The investors who buy them do so in return for the promise of a yield when the bond matures. So it's like you buy this thing, so that's giving the government money, and in 10 years' time, they'll give you some money for it, right? But if you have money to invest, your decision on where to invest it, it's a combination of safety and return. You might accept a lower return if it's a safer investment. So typically the bond market is where people go just to make sure you invest in the stock market. Of course, all sorts of things can happen, as we have seen. The bond market is supposed to be a bit more stable over a long period of time. So if you have no serious doubts that the government will pay up when the time comes, you accept a lower yield because it's more certain. But if you worry that the government might not pay up, then you're taking a higher risk for not much reward. So you'll look for a better return elsewhere. So the central bank then has to raise the offered yields in order to tempt the investors back. This means the government have to then pay out more for those bonds when they mature. So for a given level of debt, the cost of servicing it increases. That's what we talk about when we say the cost of borrowing has gone up. It could either be that the debt itself has gone up, the actual amount of borrowing has gone up, or just the cost of servicing it. That's the problem we have had in the UK since Brexit. Because our bonds, which we call them gilts because we have to be special, because they're seen as riskier than before Brexit, we have to offer high yields often, but that drives up the cost of borrowing. And that is the reason why Reeves has had to readjust her budgets to introduce unpopular cuts. Ultimately, it's because of that. The same pressure will hit US budgets. If investors are less sure that America will pay up, as it consistently has, at least for decades, then bond yields will have to increase. This increases the amount the Treasury has to set aside in the budget for servicing the debt. So, when you're setting your budget, government's setting a budget, it's like, okay, we're taking this much money from tax revenues. We need to spend this much on public services, and then we need this amount for servicing the debt. Well, the more it costs you to service the debt, that means either you've got to balance the books, you either need to raise those revenues, or you've got to cut your spending. But although Trump has made a song and dance about cuts, not very many have really been made. And Congress are now working on tax cuts. So the revenues are intended to go down without any clear sign that expenditure will. In fact, if investors are not very confident about your bonds, the last thing you really ought to be doing is cutting taxes. Then there's the deficit. So the deficit between what the US Treasury is bringing in and spending is already increasing. The difference is extra borrowing. This is another scenario where tax cuts should be the last thing on your mind. If anything, the pressure is for tax rises. If you're an investor in American bonds, consider what you're seeing from the US government. First, you're seeing a deliberate attempt to stifle global trade without any indication that the USA itself will make net gains from it. Quite the reverse, in fact. So there will be less trade. That means businesses will make less profit. Lower profits means less tax revenue. And also more unemployment, so more social security spending. There's already a deficit, and the deficit is widening. The anti-trade policy will only make matters worse. Second, you see both the president and Congress hell-bent on tax cuts. Well, that's just going to put more pressure on servicing the debt. Can't assume the government will just cut on services because that could cause political difficulties. Frankly, it's no wonder America's credit rating has finally been downgraded. It is following the same pattern we saw in the UK. The Conservatives were pushing for a harder and harder Brexit, and our credit rating began falling. It was AAA, now it's AA3, and caused by the same issues. A country that stifles trade and allows the national debt to keep increasing is going to have a harder time servicing that debt. And there comes a point where the cost of servicing the debt becomes so high that it's politically difficult to deal with. Our extreme Tory Brexit is different to the MAGA tariffs and Doge escapades, but they are having the same impact on the economy. And the biggest problem worrying investors, and reflected in this downgrade from Moody's, as I say, is the fact that the American governments, or successive governments, just haven't taken the deficit seriously. Like Rachel Reeves in this country made a big song and dance about the fact we're going to balance the books, balance the books. And some of what she's done for that is been unpopular. People have thought that there could have been other ways to do it, myself included. But she's been determined we are going to balance the books. In America, they haven't been doing that for years. You know, Trump initially, remember, just a few months ago, wanted Congress to remove the debt ceiling specifically so he could borrow for tax cuts again. So what guardrails there are on allowing the national debt to go out of all control? He wanted them to remove it completely just so that he could borrow for tax cuts. That is literally what did for Liz Truss in Britain. Trump gets away with it, presumably due to the healthier US economy. They're even using the same arguments. Oh, but the tax cuts would boost growth. In stark contrast to all the evidence from both the USA and around the world, investment boosts growth. And the latest analysis of Trump's plans means that US debt would increase by about 18%. That's what the plan is. To boost debt, which is already costing a bit, by an extra 18% over the next few years. So debt would be way higher. Tax revenues would be lower, because tax cuts, right, as well as stifling trade. And as more investors get cold feet, the yields would go up, raising the cost of servicing that greater debt even more. And you run the risk of like a spiral if you don't come up with a long-term plan. It has also, of course, contributed to the Federal Reserve having to hang fire on interest rate cuts. So that makes investment even less likely. And it's investment that you need for growth. Literally everything that Trump and the Republicans are doing to the US economy, it almost seems like it's designed to weaken the country. I know Trump is a Russian asset, but is Congress as well. People in Britain and America, I think, as well as the wider world, I think really need to learn here. Conservative parties are not the economically, fiscally sound people that they profess to be. In fact, the most successful con trick in modern politics is getting voters to believe that their particular version of the Conservatives or Republicans, whatever, oh yeah, they might have shitty attitudes, but at least they're good with the economy. No, they're not. And even their president knows this. 20 years ago, Donald Trump, and this is true, I've heard him say it, said that the Democrats do better with the economy than the Republicans. The data makes that clear too, and in other countries as well. Governments who invest are the best with the economy. Conservative governments are the best at conning voters, which is why, not for the first time, Americans voted for a president and Congress because they thought it would be best for the economy. And they're now witnessing an unprecedented assault on their own economy from the people they voted for. Will the lessons ever be learned? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.